Good morning, and thank you for joining us. We have now been 6 days without garbage pickup in the city of Jackson. I know that the residents are suffering and that we are in a very difficult space. I want to be clear that we are working hard to an end to this situation. Earlier this week, I reached out to 3 city council members who voted against the current contract for garbage pickup of the trash. I invited them to sit down with me individually to begin to work on a solution. Councilman Foote flat out said no. Councilman Hartley never replied. Councilman Banks accepted my invitation. However, he never showed up for our meeting. Later, all 3 gentlemen asked to sit down with me collectively for a meeting, but I declined. The city attorney advised me against that meeting, citing the statute surrounding the Open Meetings Act. That is why I declined. And after reading that particular statute, while it does not represent a quorum, the statute is quite clear that it could lead to a violation of the Open Meetings Act to do such. When it became clear that not one of those council members were willing to negotiate, I reached out to our solid waste division and our public works department so that we could put together a plan to place dumpsters in parking lots at the old Dillard's building at the Metro Center Mall. Today and Friday from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. and also open the city landfill on Saturday from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Individuals they can only accept household trash, no tires, bulky items, hazardous materials can be accepted. This is an imperfect solution, but this is our effort to mitigate the challenge that we find ourselves in. I want to state that again. We recognize that this is an imperfect solution, but our effort is to mitigate this crisis and mitigate the challenge that our residents find themselves in. Yesterday, we also sat down with the state auditor, Shad White, to discuss concerns with this process. And I want to state that I believe that was a good meeting and that we learned a lot. On Monday, I want to let you know that we are calling another emergency council meeting in the hopes of getting a favorable vote on this contract. We chose Monday because the council already has a work session scheduled for that day, and Councilman Foote, Hartley, Lee, and Lindsay have already indicated that they will be there. Speaking of the council, I want to take a moment to publicly thank Councilwoman Virgie Lindsay, Councilman Brian Griselle, and Councilwoman Angelique Lee for supporting the RFP process and supporting the residents of Jackson. It is my hope that over the next few days I can meet with Councilman Banks, Councilman Foote, and Councilman Hartley individually to come to an agreement and for them to do the right thing for the residents of Jackson. In the meantime, I know that many of you have asked about paying for garbage collections when you are not receiving the service that you are paying for. I want to be clear that we are researching right now as to how we can apply a credit to residents' bills so that they will not be paying that without the benefit of service ultimately. I want to thank the citizens of Jackson who have stepped up on their own to assist residents and especially the elderly. I want to thank PDT Logistics for helping hundreds this week, and several other folks have stepped up to help others pick up trash as well. With that, I will take any questions that you may have.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us your idea on this Councilman Banks' proposal for a 90-day emergency contract with Richards, while his idea of a third-party neutral evaluator is brought in to propose a new RFP?
I would say that based on our conversation with audit, we believe that proposing the contract that is in front of us is the best path forward at this time. I will also say that everything that we've stated to this point remains in terms of when you talk about an emergency contract, there has to be willingness on the behalf of the contractor themselves in order to go into that emergency. I will say that as our city attorney has inquired to that vendor, who is the only vendor, and I want to be clear on this, capable at this time. When I say capable, what do I mean? I mean that no other vendor has presently the trucks in the area, has the workforce, and the capacity to execute this in the near term, right? And so that vendor has to be willing to do so. And as we have asked about prices in a potential emergency circumstance for any period of time, right, they have not demonstrated an eagerness to provide that yet. They have not yet provided any prices on that, right? And so I won't hypothesize, or I won't guess as to why that is, but I would like to let people know that in order for that to take place, this isn't just a company that is just looking for, you know, a few months or a period of time. This is a regional company that has contracts in several cities, and so they're not looking for, you know, a handout. They're looking for an opportunity, and I don't know if they're willing to take such a short opportunity.
But your responsibility is to the taxpayers and the voters of Jackson, not to Richards disposal.
I don't think anything that I said indicates that I believe I have a responsibility to Richards disposal. I think everything that I said indicates what our opportunities are and what the limitations on what that offer is. I don't know how you interpreted it otherwise, but I believe that I was quite clear on that. Yes, sir.
At what point does the city expect for MDEQ to start levying fines for lack of work?
We've also reached out to MDEQ to have a meeting related to this, and the response that we got is that the leadership will not be available until next week to have a meeting. And so we look forward to having a meeting to discuss this. Prayerfully, as I indicated, that we intend on having an emergency council meeting to discuss this. Prayerfully, it can be resolved before that period of time next week. You know, and this adds to the question that was asked earlier, when it was asked about this temporary solution, or how we resolve this ultimately. The council members who have voted against the contract have stated that they believe that this can be resolved in court. The problem with that is that is not only time consuming, but their hope that this could be resolved in court runs against the advice that their independent counsel provided them in terms of whether, and their lawsuit is about them being able to negotiate a contract. That runs against what their independent counsel told them, and it runs against what Justice Dickinson put in his opinion that was not appealed, and it runs against what the Supreme Court recently in the no negative veto ruling. They doubled down on the fact that that could not happen, right? And so we just want to end the delay. I'm not here to talk negatively about any council person. I have not, that has not been my effort. I have been engaged in how we can negotiate and how we can have serious discussions about what the perceived or actual issues may be. Okay. Yes, I'm gonna come down here and then I'll come back. Yes.
Any idea on whether or not the collectors are still being paid, and has there been any discussion with Richards about what compromises they might accept in order to appease the council who are opposed to the 6-year contract?
So the collectors, I'm not, sorry.
The people who actually work in the streets.
Are they still being paid? I can't speak definitively. It has been my understanding that they that there was an effort to pay them in the short term. How long that will last, I cannot share with you. That is a matter of what the capacity of Richard's disposal is. But I do know that they indicated that in the short term they are going to try to maintain, paying them and the workforce. With respect to Richard's disposal and a willingness to negotiate, there lies the problem. There has been no communication on any specific issue for Richards to negotiate on. At one point, I think early in the process, Councilwoman Lindsay expressed concerns over, well, I don't know if your trucks are small enough to go through alleys that are, in my ward. And so when that happened, she then took an opportunity to ride with Richards to show them the alleys in her ward and discuss what their solutions were. And she was able to walk away satisfied in their capacity to do that. Also within this process, there was a discussion, because the contract that was the lowest was the one that was with the bins, and it was lower than the one without the bins. There was a discussion about whether there was a concern related to whether our house count was proper and whether or not we would purchase enough bins to meet each house, and whether it would amount to a higher cost and a higher burden on the city. And so we changed that contract so that wouldn't be the case, and we talked about fair market, that we would go to the market and get a fair market value on those bins in order to avoid that challenge. As those challenges were resolved, there has not been a challenge articulated yet for Richards to respond to. And so when I say that I can't go to the next vendor and that is not legally possible, what the law says is that you have to abide by the RFP, what you put in that RFP. An RFP, and I'm not going to get too technical, is a unilateral contract. It is a unilateral contract to all vendors who respond. And so you have to maintain that contract or you are in breach if you do otherwise, other than the rules you put out, right? And so what our RFP says is that we cannot go to the next vendor, or we can negotiate on the terms of service. The terms of service, right? And if you have not stated an issue with the terms of service, then Richards does not walk away and we cannot go to the next vendor, right? Added to that is the fact that the other vendors themselves have said that they're not honoring their price, which was how they showed an act of agreeing to that contract, and it takes them out of that process. Yes, sir.
Mayor, I've got two questions. The first one being, you said you met with Auditor Shad White, and you said you believe that meeting went very well. If you wouldn't mind describing why you believe that meeting went so well, and two, in terms of these garbage drop-offs, especially the ones at Dillard's, how do you enforce who's going to be out there watching to make sure no one else dumps anything else in there, as well as who's bringing those containers out and who's taking the trash away to the city landfill after?
So I'll take your latter question first. We have employees out there who are monitoring to make certain what is being done. There lies the problem. First of all, we don't have a stockpile of dumpsters to place, throughout the city, and that's why we chose a central location, right? And also, we have to commit workforce in order to monitor what is being placed in there. And that also is something that creates a challenge of dispersing. Even if we had a stockpile of dumpsters, it creates a challenge with dispersing dumpsters all across the city. I think that the meeting with Shad was productive. As I said, we wanted to, ask questions. People have asked things like about the potential emergency contract if we could get an agreement from a vendor. And so I thought that how they spoke to that was informative. And out of that, we concluded that this is the best path forward to reintroduce that contract.
Mayor, quick follow-up for the DEQ question. What specifically is the city looking for DEQ to do rather than having this go into court for an elongated discussion?
I don't know that we're asking MDEQ to come up for a solution per se. We're still working towards that. I don't think that's their role. But knowing that we can be penalized, knowing that we're trying to put mitigating factors in here and see how we can resolve this, we need to know what MDEQ's stance is on this, not only so that we can protect the city and protect the residents, but so that we can bring that information back to the council and communicate how that relates to the timeline in which we resolve this problem. We want to resolve this as soon as possible, right? I want to resolve this now, right? And so that is why we're hosting these conversations. It is also why, I didn't try to put up a contract today, right? One, I know that there's still resistance. There's still a lot of discussions taking place all over the city and arguments being made. I'm not really invested in the arguments right now, right? I'm invested in a solution. I'm invested in how we operate from information and how we operate in a way that is most helpful to our residents and giving them relief right now.
Mayor, I recall Jake Scott was the low bidder on a construction contract in the city. The council did not approve it. And ultimately, Jake Scott won in court and was paid for the entire amount of the job.
Mm-hmm.
Question is, does the city have exposure from Richard suing the city for the full amount of the contract value, if in fact he was the lowest and best bidder?
So I won't make arguments against the city, right? I don't think that, it's my job to protect the city, but what I will say is that in terms of potential legal consequences, that has been one of the reasons why we've been consistent in this process. We've been consistent in what we can do because we have seen research. I just told you about a RFP being a unilateral contract, right? We've done our research. Our city attorney has done research, and there are cases, several cases in fact, where cities have been held responsible for not honoring their RFP process. One of those cases of note, one of the more prominent cases, is against the city of Jackson. My history does not go back as far as yours, and so I don't know that case specifically, but I do know that there have been holdings against the city in which the city was held responsible for either giving the contract to that vendor, or the city was held responsible for the difference between who they ended up contracting with and who the court deemed was the rightful bidder. And so if we end up in that scenario, and so, to your point, I'm agnostic towards company, right? I was agnostic when I denied all of the companies, right? And went with Waste Management because it was the cheapest. I was agnostic when I chose, when FCC was presented to me, and I chose FCC because they were the lowest. And I'm agnostic today when you have a company that is 32% less. So am I loyal to anything? Yes, I'm loyal to price, and I'm loyal to what best serves the residents of Jackson. Point blank, period. And that is what the facts demonstrate. So that is where we are. And we don't want to be sued. And on top of the fact that we could be, that residents will be required to pay a premium because of a more expensive contract that provides less. But stacked on top of that, possibly being sued, and the damages being incorporated in the bills that people pay. And so it could be a very dangerous circumstance. Yes?
Looking into the future, if this isn't resolved and the EPA has stepped in for Jackson's water system, is there something that the EPA can do to help resolve this situation if it does continue down the road?
I won't, I don't foresee the EPA.
Start repeating the questions.
Okay, I've been asked to start repeating the questions. The question was that the EPA has stepped in to assist the city of Jackson as it relates to our challenges with our water system and whether I believe that the EPA might potentially step in to resolve this issue. I don't foresee the EPA viewing this situation in the same light that they view the water circumstance. I won't limit them in terms of their capacity and their power, but I don't see an immediate path that the EPA would do that.
Mr. Mayor, do you
Yes.
consider yourself not to have been a part of the settlement between the city and Richards in that federal lawsuit settlement where Richards would leave if the Supreme Court ruled in the council's favor on this?
That's not what the lawsuit said. The lawsuit, you asked me, did I consider myself to be a part of the settlement with Richards and the council, where Richards said that they would leave, right, if the Supreme Court ruled against them. So to be clear, no, I do not consider myself to be a part of the settlement, and quite easily, because I'm not a signature on that particular agreement, one, but that's not even really relevant to the conversation we're having today. That,
Lawsuit against the city of Jackson.
if I can finish, then I'm sure you will walk away with clarity if you let me finish, right? That lawsuit was related to an emergency contract. Richards never agreed to walk away or to take away their right under the bid for the 6-year contract. And so effectively, yes, the emergency contract has ended, and they have walked away from that particular emergency contract, right? But that was an agreement between those parties, right? And it has absolutely zero effect on their right under the 6-year contract. If you read the lawsuit, it will be quite clear to you.
But you sounds like you're splitting hairs, Mayor, because clearly the majority of the council does not want Richards after the last year and all the legal haggling that's gone on.
I'm not splitting hairs. I'm just providing you facts, okay?
Mayor, you say you can't go to another vendor due to a breach of contract. How is it a violation if the contract with Richards wasn't valid?
So if the contract with Richards, well, first of all, the contract with Richards was never invalid. That is, you know,
Repeat the question.
yeah, the question was, I had said it was a breach of contract. How is it a violation if the contract was invalid? I understand that there has been communication to you saying that the contract was invalid. That is not what the independent counsel to the independent attorney to the council stated to them. That is not what any court has suggested, right? And so what happens is a lie will make it halfway around the world before the truth puts its pants on, right? And so you need to be clear on what is actually factual and what are political arguments that are being made in order to secure the decision or who they may favor, right? But I can't operate on who you favor, right? The reason that it would be a breach of contract, and I'm trying not to get too technical because I know that the residents don't understand. I am an attorney, and so I understand the law, I understand contracts. There are two types of contracts in the world. You have a bilateral contract, which is, you know, I need work on my house, and so I hire a contractor. I promise to pay him. He promises to do the work, and if he does the work, I pay him, and that is what you call a bilateral contract. A unilateral contract is that you set out terms for the public to say by their action that they agree to those terms, right? And so an RFP says we're looking to pick up garbage, right? We have an expired garbage contract. I need to make that clear because there are residents that say, look, why did you mess with it? Why did you touch this contract? I didn't touch anything. The contract expired, and by state law, I was required to do an RFP, right? In order to publicly announce to all potential vendors that we are looking to have a new contract for garbage collections. When you do that, you have to abide by all of the terms that you set out. Terms, when you talk about how the calculation went, this city attorney right here stood before the council, stood before residents in Jackson, and told them exactly what percentage of the scoring would be price, what percentage of the scoring would be presentation, what percentage of the scoring would be things like experience, right? And so once you set that out, you can't then change the terms and say, well, I don't like how it came out from my scoring sheet, right? And if you do, then it comes to the circumstance that this gentleman just told you about, where vendors have sued cities in the past. They have sued Jackson in the past and won because Jackson did not abide by its own RFP. Okay?
Some citizens say that the city is incapable of taking care of its crime, its water, and now its trash. What is your response to this?
My response is that we can walk and chew gum. And I would say that we have put forth a number of solutions. I know that there are many residents that are frustrated, and they deserve to be frustrated. And we're working each and every day in order to resolve this. Yes?
Is there a tentative time for the meeting Monday?
Let me get back with you on that. I don't want to lie to you. We'll publish it, but standing here right now, I don't want to misrepresent a wrong time. I have a time that's in my head, but I want to confer before I say that. Yeah. Yes.
Mayor, the RFP states the city can amend the terms of the RFP at any time. So why couldn't the city move on if Richards was already rejected?
You want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. What section of the RFP are you in?
This is a question from another coworker.
Okay, well, your coworker might want to check the actual terms of the RFP. So his question was that the RFP says that the city of Jackson could amend the terms of the contract at any time, or amend the terms of, I guess, the agreement at any time. And I asked him what section of the RFP he was reading from, because I am intimately familiar with every section of that RFP. And what I can tell you is there's no section of our RFP that says that we can unilaterally, without reason, move on and amend the terms of that contract. The only thing I will add is that if you look at, I think it's section 3.4 of the RFP, it says exactly what the mayor said earlier. We can negotiate the elements of work. And as long as a vendor is willing to negotiate the elements of work, we can continue that negotiation. But if a vendor walks away from that negotiation, then that opens the opportunity for us to move on to other vendors. The other reality that we have in this RFP is that we can talk all day about moving on to the next vendor, but at this point, we really only have one vendor left. The other two vendors have responded and told us that they're now rejecting that offer, right? So it's an offer and acceptance. They've rejected it. Waste Management said no, FCC said no. So we're literally left with one vendor who's still willing to accept the offer of the RFP and honor those prices, and that's Richards.
One other thing that I would add, because the second half of your question is one about whether we do, and this is the earlier question, a new RFP, right? So there are a few risks in that, right? One is if you go to a new RFP, you still have the potential that in this particular RFP that Richards could sue you, right, for the process in which they were denied. Secondly, and it would be time consuming, and so residents who have not had their trash picked up for 6 days are now looking at a even more prolonged period of time of trash not being picked up. And then lastly, it is going to be substantially more. How do we know that? Not because of our opinions, but because every single vendor has indicated that. Every single vendor has said gas prices have changed since I submitted my bid. The cost of purchasing trucks have changed since I submitted my bid. The cost of what we pay our employees because of inflation, CPI, all of those things have changed. And so you're looking at a significant increase, and that burden will be shifted to the residents of Jackson. And that is what we've been trying to avoid.
Mr. Mayor, what happens if the city council rejects Richards again on Tuesday, on this Monday meeting? Will you be hamstrung by the prohibition to bring it up a third time within a year?
I won't speak to I won't be specific in terms of that rule, but I will say that particular rule has been misinterpreted by the council, and knowingly so, because once again, not an attorney that I hired, an attorney that they brought in, told them that about the 2-vote rule and told them how it applies, right? And so while we're not trying to play a game, that could last, for quite some time if there's just the continued effort to reject. And the reason that it's a problem is because you only have one vendor available. What happens if they don't, if they don't approve the contract on Monday? I don't have any tricks up my sleeve. I can't create a garbage company. I can't create the capacity for the city to pick up trash. I don't have another garbage company waiting in the wings. You know, you could either believe the letters that the companies sent themselves or the things you've been told. You could either believe your lying eyes, right? Or you can believe the things you've been told, right? And so, you know, it means more pain, struggle, and stress on the residents is what it means. And it means that we are creating an emergency that does not have to be. That's what it means.
Last question. So what happens if, you just said that there's waste management is out, there's all these companies that at one point did serve the city, they're out. If Richards does choose to walk away, which the attorney and you have both said that's in the contract, if they walk away, what is left for the residents?
Then we'll have to do an RFP, another RFP, and once that new RFP takes place, which there's a period that you have to publish it, which takes time. There's a period for response, which takes time. There's a period for evaluation, which takes time. Then there's a period for negotiating of the contract, which takes time. And then there's a period for them to start, right? All which takes time, right? And so we would have to begin that process over again, and all to the detriment of the residents, both from the continued suffering and the increased price that they will suffer.